started a club culture.
185 Richmond Street West.
Wherever the scene turned, it turned to the Twilight Zone. You know, Toronto was not a cool place.
It was pretty common knowledge back in those days that Toronto clubs sucked.
Toronto, North America's fastest growing metropolis, is a young city. A rich city, on the rise, going places. There's a new feeling in the air.
It was desolate. There was not really a lot going on. You'd go to a friend's house, have a party, and that's about it.
Toronto at that time was living in the shadow of New York City.
It was very bleak, very cold. I didn't know who Wayne Gretzky was, and everyone laughed at me.
Back then, I think most of the clubs were probably around the St. Joseph area. We didn't have a concentrated entertainment district.
It was Yorkville, but that was, you know, that was like back in the disco days. The underground and whatever, there was no such thing happening at that particular point.
It was frustrating when you're in your early 20s and all you want to do is party all night long, and you couldn't.
We're all coming from a lot of different places, but together we are Ontario.
You couldn't get anybody in the same room unless they were of light.
Right after university, I had lived a year in Paris. So coming back to Toronto was like, oh, Protestant, Presbyterian, like not just waspy, like really hardcore. No, too fancy, take that off.
Tony soon walked up to myself and my friend Jenny and he said, "Are you girls from New York?"
We met Charmaine Gooden in Ports, her and Michael. That's when we were doing parties, and that's when they started coming.
It really was the hit and run kind of days where they'd find a building and they somehow managed to string some power from somewhere to somewhere.
It was, you could say risky, but they had such a knowledge of music, and we knew what people wanted to dance to because we were in it.
We grew up in a home that always had parties. It was in our blood. At 16 years old, at our school auditorium, we did one of our first big events.
I came to Brooklyn when I was 4 years old.
Is that home still around?
Yes, it is.
Can you give me the address?
It's 402 Sterling Place.
Basically, we just listened to a lot of calypso. My parents used to have parties pretty well once a month, being Trinidadians.
We started having parties at our house, rec rooms.
We did Sharon Red at Heaven's.
Go to Heaven tonight and have a devil of a good time. Heaven, Toronto's #1 night spot. Go to Heaven. Let the incredible music free you on the endless dance floor.
Booked a group called Sharon Red. At that time, had Beat the Streets. Kenny played good. The crowd loved it. And we went up to the hotel room. We had to pay the singers, and we're like, they make the money. And they were kicking the lamb chase around, but it was fun.
We would end up renting a lot of equipment, a lot of sound and lighting. Eventually thought we have to find a home.
All four brothers worked in shoe stores. Aldo, David's, Brown's, they promoted all day long.
In New York, we were still into disco, and everyone in Toronto was saying disco's dead. Disco was the early birth of house. So because of the mix, the way it was, we started to do parties.
So they would have these parties in the rec room, and we would promote the hell out of them.
From the get-go, they would start to have parties and they would just explode.
We were hanging out mostly in the village. The most inspiration we got was from the Paradise Garage.
It was sort of crazy. You'll get here, there's a door guy wearing a leather mask with a zipper.
We looked at each other, we got to take this back home to Toronto.
We got tired of just going around from rec room to rec room. We have so many people coming, we should find a spot.
There was an actor's studio. After they finished their little acting thing, we would take it over at night.
I was always trying to find where in Toronto we could just find our niche.
We walked into 185 Richmond. That's where it all began, right?
We couldn't get a license, so, okay, let's do it underground.
The very first night I was in Toronto, they said, "We're going to the Zone." And I said, "What's that?"
Right now we're on Richmond Street, roughly right about where the Twilight Zone used to be. It was right there. It's condos now. It was parking lot for a long time. You know what they say, paved the parking lot, put up a, what is it? Tore down Paradise, put up a parking lot.
It's gonna blow your mind. It's gonna be out of this world. It's gonna be like spacey. Twilight Zone. There's gotta be some sort of copyright. Oh no, I like that, the Twilight Zone.
We were all smoking a joint, and I said, hey, why don't we call it the Twilight Zone? What really blew up Twilight Zone is, yes, we were getting a crowd, but then when we decided to put in a Richard Lounge sound system.
We decided to get the same sound system as the garage. It cost us a A lot of money. We didn't spend the money on renovations. We decided just to spend it on sound and acoustics.
Oh, you had Richard Long set up the console, the Uri, the isolator.
Richard Long became very experimental with us. He had found new technology that he put together specifically for us. He ended up selling many sound systems around the world by sending people to the Twilight Zone.
He even got written up in Billboard as having one of the best sound installations in the world.
Everything about it was New York.
I was just like, wow, this is incredible. Like, incredible. Yeah.
It was like 30,000 watts in a 10,000 square foot space. So they set things up just for DJs to have fun with. We used to have a reel-to-reel machine that you could get reverse feedback loop into and have reverb and cool effects before really there was anything fancy on mixing boards.
They were the very first to have earthquakes, which didn't put out any sound, just vibration. If a record had like a whoop that went through it, it literally traveled across your head.
We had these bass bins surrounding the place. The place was decked out, man.
There was a runaway there that fell asleep in one of the bass bins, and we turned on the lights in the morning, and she was literally laying in a puddle of blood because her eardrum had exploded.
You felt like a helicopter was landing on top of you, man. And that's when I had goosebumps everywhere, and I thought, whoa, this is it, man.
We used to have a deaf group that used to come in there, and we used to have such a great time because the sound system, they could feel the sound system.
They can feel the vibration.
Any DJ that's serious about playing music in Toronto wants to play the Twilight Zone.
I played big clubs after that, but it was always so clean sounding and never had that warmth and that just all-encompassing bass and low mid-range that the Zone had. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
You're just hit with sound. If you know anything about Richard Long's system, it was like the best sound ever.
People would go and they would stand beside the speakers and you just feel their bodies.
It's like there was pressure in your chest.
That sound system was the turning point of the Twilight Zone. That's what made it become like the Paradise Garage. Had all the same elements, same DJs, the same vibes.
There's so few clubs you work in where sound is not just a priority, but like the priority.
We started getting a lot of people.
It was strictly word of mouth, and that word of mouth spread like wildfire.
First club I went to was probably the Twilight Zone.
I have an older cousin who's the one who introduced me to house music and DJing. He used to go to a club called Twilight Zone.
I was already DJing by the time I was 14 years old, but I was playing disco and funk. So when house music entered the scene, it was just sort of the natural progression.
When I was very, very young, like around maybe 11, that's when I was introduced to dance music, which was disco at the time. Disco just getting into garage house.
We heard there's a place called Twilight Zone. There's a really good sound system. That's all they play, basically just house stuff.
It was an interesting time. That's when everything started kicking off. People started dressing up actually to go out. The whole Chicago scene was invading Toronto at that particular point, the house music scene.
How hot is house music now? On a scale of 1 to 10, that's 12.
Everybody was wrong. Everybody said it's going to have a sudden death, like the death of disco right after Disco Mania in the mid-1970s.
Comment ça va? C'est magnifique. This is Pierre. Cape, suit, check out that lining. And the chapeau? Pierre on boogie.
Back in the disco days, a lot of 12 inches were minimum 10 minutes long. They were like stories. It was like a Broadway show, but without the actors.
Every restaurant was like a club at nighttime. They moved some tables off the floor, and all of a sudden the floor was all, lit up from underneath.
It was a really big black-white thing too.
There was a crossover. It started out being punk, it went to new wave, and then from the new waves, it developed into the disco.
And it was a certain type of disco.
At that time, it was called Jack Tracks.
Hasn't really changed that much. It's just synthesized.
The house scene started out in the Black Gate scene. That's where we used to hang out. We were straight, but we used to hang out in that scene. It was cool, straight people to hang out in the gay scene back then. I guess we were one of them.
It is disco music, so it's not really that much different. In the middle 70s and the early 80s, it was all disco music then. So much stuff that was produced, and really produced well. As far as the warehouse was concerned, it was the only after-hours club here, and I was allowed to get away with anything I wanted to when it came to putting music on for them, and people accepted that.
There was nothing bubblegum about it. A lot of it was dark, bass-driven, eerie. You close your eye and you and you just lose yourself.
I remember going to the Twilight Zone the first time and just going, wow.
People who seriously wanted to listen to progressive dance music at that time, this was their only choice.
I remember almost as if it was yesterday, we walked up the stairs.
As you climb up the stairs, the thump is getting louder.
You hear,
and you're starting to feel
the
it.
drywall vibrating.
When you step inside, that was a trip.
It would be like in the 40s when you go to an underground warehouse, like a jazz party, and you open the doors and everybody's jumping, singing. That's how it was then.
It was like getting high without taking any drugs.
And we both just kind of stood there and like, what the fuck is this?
You just felt like, wow.
When you got there and you were let in, you became part of it.
Eventually, I just stopped going to school. I was learning everything I needed to, like at the Twilight Zone, and the people I met there, and getting involved in that sort of life, of nightlife and culture and fashion.
It's a party, okay?
Twilight Zone gang right here.
It was really different.
It was a place that you release.
You can stay here and do anything. Not care what anyone thinks about you.
It was about the music and the social connection with other people who kind of, it's like an unspoken word, like this is where we groove.
You were just into it. That was social media.
That was another thing for house music too. I mean, that was like the new beginning of house music, basically.
Probably the biggest house record that there ever was Marshall Jefferson's house music anthem, Move Your Body. When that record came out, that thing was a monster. It was that whole synth thing, dun, 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 the piano, dun, 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 dun. That thing cracked everything open.
People didn't really understand what the hell it was.
We had a lot of records back then, but this was different than anything we heard.
And as soon as we walked in the doors and I heard house music for the first time, I was totally turned on.
Albert Assoon and Tony Assoon, who used to run the Twilight Zone, they used to be neighbors of mine down the street. I was like probably like 15 and 16, just like going to clubs. I mean, you weren't even allowed to get into the club at that age.
I think it was really important because it was definitely the innovator in that idea of having a non-alcoholic club midnight until 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning.
Over here is like the same super freak girl from Hagerman's from the week before, some makeshift outfit that she came up with. She'd be dancing beside some privileged girl from North Toronto who buys her shoes at David's. It wasn't like a clash of cultures. It was like everything was like,
Some people would just show up in shorts because they were there to dance all night, and others of us would be in whatever outfits we pull from thrift shops or, from wherever we found it. And it was just about being very creative and doing crazy things with yourself.
I used to book shows at Heaven. We put rap shows in, and it was 99% black. That was a black club. Twilight Zone was a mixed place. And Twilight Zone did bring in some house music, bring in the New York, that scene, and bridge the gap.
Dean and Dan from D Square, that was their favorite club for years.
Right. This is all a collection of everyone.
There were a lot of really people that would never mix.
Wayne Gretzky used to hang out at the Twilight Zone.
We didn't talk about that.
There was a change in acceptance. People accepting each other in that space.
I'd have everybody from barefoot hippies, mohawks, to people in really nice clothes that were left over from the dance crowd. You have the new romantics and new wave people mixed in with like metalheads, I mean, it was just a total mix of people.
We got them to dance together, and that didn't happen in any club in Toronto.
So it didn't matter what you looked like, how you dressed, gay, straight, what color you were.
You had a bit of everybody. You had like the straight crowd, the gay crowd.
Straight, white, black, Asian, doesn't matter. Everybody was there. And just giving off the same vibe.
But we're all doing it for our own, own rhythm, our own feelings. It was amazing.
It was the music, it was the community, it was the people. It was going home and during the week, hey man, this record was great. Do you remember this thing?
We would talk to each other during the week. Do you remember that routine?
There was no rules or regulations. As things flowed, they just made their decisions about the way the place would be run and the style of music that would form throughout the night.
There was just this easy camaraderie that is. I go to other people's places. I know tons of people have clubs. It doesn't feel that way because the owners are not that way.
That's the way that Paradise Garage seemed to run itself, and that's the way we kind of ran the Twilight Zone.
People go to these parties for release. They know they're gonna get music, because they don't get it all the time. And it's hard to come by. They go there to dance. But the minute the door opens, they're there on the dance floor. They're not waiting for something to happen. They're not there to look at the DJ.
They were doing fashion shows, and they were doing arts performances, and they were bringing in DJs very early on.
They had this unisex bathroom, and I remember being as young as I was, the first time I went in there, I was terrified to be in a unisex bathroom. I couldn't go to the bathroom with a bunch of girls standing behind me. I had stage fright.
People were having sex in the bathroom.
I think I was one of those people.
Yeah, I was like way more open-minded. If you're in the Twilight Zone and they played like a short hip-hop set, everybody got into it. Because a lot of the people that were there were also into hip-hop too. They weren't only just into this house music.
Breakdancing was just coming out. Somebody big had a video out, and then we saw them, and then we said we want these breakdancers to come to the Twilight Zone, and then we did it.
It was the first time ever in North America.
Everyone had their place that they liked to dance to that song.
Yeah.
All the fabulous dancers came to Twilight Zone.
You could be anything there and do anything there. That was the best part of it.
It felt like it's this different community that was a much more who I was.
That's what everybody loved about Twilight Zone. You could be yourself, you could be different, and still feel like you were a part of a gang.
We'd sleep if we had to sleep. We'd go into the video room and sleep for 15, 20 minutes, come back out, go dance for a bit.
What's really neat here, you know, I like the crowd.
So we had a mix of runaways, homeless people, people tripping on acid. It was quite the wild scene.
I mean, it just basically comes down to you getting wasted. You go out, you have a good time, you dress up, go to the zone.
You come in there pretty wasted and not feel like you were gonna be in any real danger.
It was $15 always. It was always like way more expensive than any other club.
Sometimes we'd let people in that had no money because they were really good dancers. It wasn't always about the money, it was about the atmosphere.
What do you guys like about the zone compared to other clubs?
The sound system.
Best sound system ever. I was in awe.
Why do you think the zone's so popular?
I think it's the sound system, the music. The music, the sound. Plain and simple.
And it took you to another church.
Captivating. It was church.
We didn't realize that these guys were just playing like the coolest stuff.
It was funk and disco, and later it was house, but always the old favorites.
The night always ended with a gospel tune.
I want to thank you, Heavenly Father.
The floor vibrated, and so you really got into dancing.
Once you experienced it, it was like you had to be there every week, and no matter what had gone on that week, you had to make it down there.
The lines were ridiculous.
It was very much like Studio 54. Michael or somebody would be outside and they'd be like looking at you and, hey, can I get in?
But once you get in, it was just like nothing you really experienced before.
You walked into a wall of heat and sound.
Even if you didn't like the music or whatever, you said, well, all these people gotta be jumping for something.
It was Twilight Zone every Saturday until they closed.
I was cleaning the club up once, and this guy brought his parents in, his new wife, and he says, this is where we met on this dance floor. Yeah, I wanted to show my parents.
All the people were provincial, but they were all being thrown together for the first time.
It all came together just the right way. Your age, the music, the atmosphere, the zone, the sound, it just combined, and that's what a lot of people took out of that.
Parents would even sometimes drop their kids, and then they would drop them home and come back and party after.
Once you became a regular at the zone, you became a regular at the zone.
Sleeping over at Sheila's tonight, Mom. Okay, we take turns, so I couldn't do it 2 nights in a row.
We all kind of grew up in that club together, which was pretty special.
What else is special about it?
People. It's an atmosphere that no other club recreates in Toronto. People make the club.
Oh, where do you know that person from? He says, You felt like you were part of something really exclusive, underground.
Once you were a part of it, then you were a part of it.
We've always sort of kept up with things by accepting change all the time and moving with the change.
We started melding the music together.
The music was a pretty good mix of funk and roller skating music and disco, salsa stuff, prelude stuff, West End stuff, a lot of electro, freestyle.
It wasn't really our kind of music.
No. No, it was not. Yeah.
When you say our kind of music, what do you mean?
Well, you know, things all blend together now, but then there was still some dividing lines. Wednesdays from midnight till 6 in the morning, there was no other option where you could go hear the range of music we're talking about on a sound system like that in a dark room and just kind of lose yourself, commune with like-minded souls.
When you love music, when you want to bring music to people, and also when you recognize that music is such a physical thing. I don't just mean dancing, I mean being in a room with music. To be surrounded by it and to feel the music in your body is what brings a room together.
Saturday night that the Assumes did was a house night. Dawn's night on Friday was kind of a mixture of that kind of world, but much more nod to sort of what was going on in English dance music.
We met this other Scottish guy, Don Cochran, and he showed up one night with a whole pile of people, like 40, 50 people, and he said, you know, I'd love to spin here one night.
He says, can you come by on Wednesday and do a set? And I did a 1 hour set. And he said, can you start Friday?
A lot of what he played, he talks about some of the people from CFNY paying attention to his playlists, and then some of that music then being played on CFNY.
I was there from the very, very beginning, and it was a slow start because I had to compete with Voodoo and Dominoes, and we just kept bringing them in and bringing them in and bringing them in.
It wasn't restricted to R&B and house. It was an all-comers type place.
It was an interesting spin-off because we sort of fed off each other.
You could see the bleed into each other.
Definitely influenced by what the Assumes were doing on Saturdays. He would go on their Saturday night, and the tunes that grabbed him, he would incorporate into his Friday, and vice versa.
We shared the music, and because we shared the music, they learned from me and I learned from them.
We were bringing rock and roll, punk, new wave, disco, psychedelia. It was kind of our own personal jukebox.
Well, both Siobhan and I and Don and all the people that worked there, we'd mix Grandmaster Flash with Led Zeppelin.
When you have new wave exploding at the same time as house music, at the same time as early hip hop, and freestyle is still an influence, and you know, disco is seeping into all of these things, obviously, there's way more crossover in sound than a lot of people like to think about. That's a lot of what the Twilight Zone captured.
Everyone says, well, how do you get the two crowds to mix together? At that time, there was no hate, it was all love, it was just all about party.
It was peaceful and groovy. I mean, it was a safe place.
Had access to house music here in Canada other than the Assume brothers.
The guy that sold me the majority of records was Phil Smith and Vinyl Mania. We had Downtown Records.
The Assume brothers were part of this record pool, For the Record, which was the same record pool that, you know, Larry Levan and David Morales and Frankie Knuckles were getting their records from.
It was an organization for DJs that got promotional records, and you could get anywhere from 25 to 50 records a week.
We were able to get records that hadn't been released for a year to 2 years.
All the greatest DJs were in For the Record. From Larry Levan to Jelly Bean, to Larry Patterson, to T. Scott, to Tony Humphries, Bruce Forrest.
I booked Johnny Donnell, and he told me about David. I called up Judy, who was manager and so forth.
Judy Weinstein?
Yes.
They would get their hands on new releases before anyone else.
You got promos that never made it to the store.
People will go to the store and say,
do you have any Twilight Zone music?
You can't find music as great as at the Zone.
Twilight Zone has been the most influential club we've had in Toronto.
Twilight Zone is the origin of house music in Toronto.
You ask anybody that had sort of an impartial view of what was happening to dance music at that time, it was definitely the Assume brothers bringing the house to Toronto.
I got asked to play at this club called the Twilight Zone. It's the first country I played out of America.
What about the guest DJs they bring in?
They're hot. I mean, they get the best from New York.
I mean, they were bringing in the biggest house DJs from Toronto, Chicago, and New York. And that was really the triangle of house music back then.
You know, a lot of these DJs from New York, Kenny Carpenter, everybody used to come up and say, yo, listen, I want to play at your club. When can I come up?
We were able to get Frankie Knuckles and David Morales. It was their first ever international gigs.
The Twilight Zone, if you want to look at it historically, was the first club to get into a more DJ-specific type of entertainment.
And they were bringing in the best people.
They ushered in, you could say, house music into Canada, but really so much more they were ushering in culture, music culture, and in the most humble of ways.
We were featuring a whole bunch of different DJs from New York. Not knowing that featuring DJs would be a big thing.
Not really since disco did you see people like kind of like dive into this music and just live for it.
When David played, it was the point where the crowd would get goosebumps, he would get goosebumps. They would scream at you. It was a whole different vibe. No cell phones to like text while you're dancing. You're just dancing and that's it.
The type of music you could not hear anywhere else. It was really music from my idol, Larry Levan, like from the Paradise Garage. Tony had taken it to Toronto and brought it to Toronto from New York with him. And it was the only place that was playing that kind of music.
You always associated a DJ with a club. Larry Levan was the Paradise Garage.
Our route starts from that to 4 on the floor.
It was because of the structure of the music. Larry came out, he played a lot of great things. The atmosphere was very, very different, and the crowd was very different.
And all of these clubs with their moments, they were communities. It's where people went religiously. It was their church, it was their temple. And the preacher was the DJ. They manipulated sound, they mixed, they played all night.
When you hear like the anthemic types of songs, house music all night long, the same beat. Boom, boom, boom.
It became sort of a community for DJs. Like a lot of the DJs out there now, they were at the Zone, they'd come to the Zone gave them the platform, Dave Campbell, and so many others. They'd all try to get on the turntables at like 5 a.m. after Albert and Tony had done their set.
Derek May, him and Alton Miller from Muse Recordings, they used to come at Twilight Zone all the time.
They came with some vinyl once, and he spun for a while, and we were like, how is he playing?
Yeah.
I played the Zone a few times. That's probably like one of the first clubs I really started playing at. Soon Brothers would let me go on for like 20 minutes or half an hour. It was like heaven.
The response that you got from the audience is just amazing.
It's an atmosphere that's created that no other club can create.
Twilight Zone definitely had its own scent. There would be a mix of maybe like somebody smoking hash, mixed with a cocoa puff, mixed with French formula hairspray, Polo Cologne, Dracar Noir, and, fog fluid, right? And that all mixed together would make this intoxicating Twilight Zone aroma.
I just wanted to fit into something, and this was a place I could fit in. I felt like, this is me.
If I hadn't gone to the Twilight Zone and been a part of that world, I don't think I would have the career I had today, because it made me feel very different about things and about myself.
You forget that we live in an era of visual pornography. There's just so much visual information available to people. But back then there wasn't. You had to either see it or read about it. When I was a kid, my mother got me tickets to see Jimi Hendrix. And I went down to the show at C&E Coliseum, so these hippies and people. I had enough visual information to last me for a year. People communicated verbally back then. There was no texting, there was no cell phones. You had to write a letter or make a plan to meet somebody somewhere. So where were exchanges of ideas? They had to be in a public place. So the public place served as a fulcrum for ideas. It was never about a transaction, about a transaction of ideas. You promoted yourself, you promoted what you're doing, you had ideas, you're doing this, you met, you did. It was tactile. These were creative spaces. This is where creative people met. They wanted their own lounge, their own salon. That's what it was. And that's what the Twilight Zone was when it first got going. The Assoons opened a place, did a great job. I hope they made lots of money. I'm not sure it was completely about the money. That's the difference.
I didn't see them as greedy businessmen. I saw them as artists themselves. It was a time of our lives that we were learning so much about who we were, who we wanted to be. We found a lot of good friends in that place.
It was only a building that harbored an energy and a vibe. That these four men, if given the opportunity, would be able to come up somewhere else. Like this wonderful weed, flower, whatever you want to call it.
Whatever scene there is on Adelaide, the club district now, it's a vestige of what the Twilight Zone was.
It did, I think, change the city in a very particular way, the way city TV changed the city in that sense, where it just creates a different energy, atmosphere, and vibe. And then more diversified people feel more accepted. And whether it's through the music or through the programming or through the fashion, you feel that you belong somewhere. And the Zone specifically did that.
Even in the world, forget about North America, I have to put Twilight Zone in the same category as Zanzibar, / the Garage, / like Red Zone, you know. I'm talking about clubs that made an impact.
And they were so naive in business and things like that.
There can never be any doubt as to what their motivation was. You know, people criticize them, oh, they weren't great businessmen. That was never their skill.
We're up against people with some really deep pockets.
I think they always had a bit of a curse. I think part of that was the fact that they didn't have the money that some of the competitors did.
When you have a situation where, you know, a lot of people, a lot of cops, a lot of inspectors, it was a big business.
We never know when cops or bylaw guys could come by and say, you know, that's it.
They tried to close us down at every possible level that they could. And the only way that we survived as legally operating was we had to open up a snack bar.
And they'd have a buffet set up sort of halfway through with, you know, questionable cold cuts. I don't know where the Assoon brothers got that stuff.
There would be no entertainment district without them.
The city decided that this is the best area to allow nightclubs to operate.
Their true love and what they purely offered was the music.
The originality of doing this, I think, was really just for the love of the music. Again, it sounds so corny, and I get emotional talking about it because there was a purity there, and that's significant.
We can always relate to it. We can always go back and say, yeah, let's go out dancing because they play music like the Twilight Zone.
My closest friends are people from the Zone.
We all reminisce about it to this day. 30 years later, that's pretty crazy.
I've worked for some pretty sleazy club promoters and club owners, and the Assoon brothers are just good people.
I adored the Assoon brothers. I'd never met anyone like them. I just thought they were incredible people.
They just took it all in stride.
We've always had to change, and we look forward to new things happening when Twilight Zone closed, and I think a lot of people that's been coming to Twilight Zone will appreciate it.
We really feel like now Toronto has given us back something that's staple, that's legendary, that's history, and we're really proud to be here.
Yeah.
It's unforgettable. It's something you can't ever forget in your life.
It was just so fresh. It was like a place that you could really be yourself. It was a life gift.
It changed my life at this place.
It took you away from your day-to-day into this next place. It really was a Twilight Zone.
It had a profound impact on music for me.
You took a different kind of adventure every time you went.
Here it is. Here's a little piece that I brought. I've been carrying it around for almost 30 years. I just thought it was a part of my life that I wanted to have a piece of.
We didn't walk the stairs. We ran up the stairs. There was nothing like it. It was life and energy and happiness and joy. Perfection.
Toronto should be very, very proud, and they should just be proud of being Toronto and not New York City. Just proud of what it is. It's certainly something else, and it's important to know where that came from, and the folks that provided that, and selflessly, not for money, but for the spectacular culture that music is everywhere.